Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to join this distinguished panel. I am also grateful for the invitation extended to me by Needs Japan, and it's wonderful to see familiar faces as well as to meet new friends. Let me quickly share my screen. So while originally I thought of focusing on Southeast Asia as a whole, we all know that Southeast Asia is a complex region of 11 nation states. And my current research focuses primarily uh, how the Philippines navigates the US China competition in the Indo Pacific. While the Philippines may not totally represent Southeast Asia, I do think that we can make the case that the Philippines is one, if not the country that experiences the massive repercussions of the intensified rivalry between the two superpowers in the region. Not to mention that within its maritime and territorial borders are regional flashpoints that could be contacts or nexuses of US China competition. This presentation focuses on to what extent the new administration of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will be able to negotiate the positioning of the Philippines in the US China rivalry in the Indo Pacific. Let me go quickly to some of the main points of this presentation. While his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, has made massive adventures or changes in Philippine foreign policy, I would like to argue that under Marcos, there might be a recalibration towards previous foreign policy positions by the Philippines. However, to the extent that this results in concrete outcomes remains to be seen. But using concepts in political science like performativity or performative governance, we might be able to tease out what are actual foreign policy positions from basically optics or performative positions, which are more or less substantive. Marcos Jr., I think, will also attempt at hedging a particular strategy that is also shared, if not better implemented, by other Southeast Asian countries. And this is because Marcos Jr., unlike his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, seeks to have good relationships with both superpowers and other powers that were alienated under Duterte. However, hedging strategies of countries like the Philippines could be considered precarious, if not uh, very challenging, given the intensified rivalry. All right. So some pundits have already mentioned that competition no longer describes the relationship between US and China, that this is increasingly a rivalry between superpowers who have different visions of the international order, and particularly uh, what that order means for the Indo Pacific. This is because the Philippines is at the center, if not would be affected by critical regional flashpoints like the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. Moreover, there are also unfavorable regional economic and political conditions that include economic crises as well as lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, Marcos Jr. might likely use foreign policy, meaning use US China competition as a way to leverage in case there would be internal politics or internal political challenges to his legitimacy and the legitimacy of his government. So, last May 2022, the Philippines had national elections that delivered an overwhelmingly majority mandate to Marcos Jr. To many of our participants here, Marcos Jr., Marcos is quite a familiar name, given that he is the son and namesake of our former late dictator Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who ruled for 21 years in the Philippines at the height of the Cold War. Marcos, to the surprise of some, was able to get almost 59% of the national vote. Given the plurality system of our presidential elections, this is indeed unprecedented in contemporary Philippine politics, as no president before Marcos Jr. was able to get a majority mandate. As you can also see that his alliance with President Duterte's daughter, Sara Duterte, who was elected vice president, as you can see in the map, in the map on your right, you're able to observe that most of their votes came from the north, which is considered as the bailiwick or the stronghold of the Marcoses, and the south, which is the stronghold of the Dutertes. This key alliance, I think, will pretty much define Philippine politics in the next 6 years. When Marcos gave his first speech to Congress, we call it the State of the Nation address in July of 2022, he said that, like his predecessor, he will continue the pursuit of an independent foreign policy guided by national interest. Uh, I would say that there is still debate until now among many in the foreign policy and even in the academic circles of what an independent foreign policy means, uh, given the country's positions, given that it is the only Southeast Asian country that has a mutual defense treaty with the United States, and what seemed to be the previous positioning of the Philippines, uh, even during the time of his father, Marcos Sr., which is heavily skewed towards the US and the West. He did mention in that speech that I will not preside over any process that will abandon a square inch of the territory of the Republic, and that he wanted to implement a policy of a friend to all and an enemy to none. This marks a significant departure from his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, who has spewed anti Western rhetoric throughout his term as president for 6 years. While searching for non traditional allies or partners that includes China and even Russia. So, what are some of the because his government is quite new. It's only been in power for 6 months. What has been some of the major foreign policy changes that he has implemented during this time? The first is that this is unprecedented again, that he, while it took some time, he appointed a career diplomat as Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Uh, the veteran diplomat actually is well perceived to be a good choice for Foreign Affairs Secretary, but it took a while before Marcos was able to decide to put in place a career diplomat. Unlike his predecessor Duterte, Marcos has started cordial engagements immediately with the United States. He also said that his government will try to negotiate some of the approved and completed deals by his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, in terms of Chinese public infrastructure projects. So it seems that Marcos wanted to renegotiate some of the terms already agreed, because while Duterte made a case that the Philippines could benefit from the BRI as well as Chinese official development assistance, by the end of Duterte's term, only 10% of all projects were completed, and very few projects actually were started during his 6 year term. Therefore, many analysts have said that the pivot to China did not really materialize under Duterte's government. Moreover, Marcos Jr.'s government also canceled the procurement of Russian helicopters for fear of repercussions from the United States because uh, the US has a law against, in terms of likely sanctions or implications of countries, especially if they have an ongoing defense or security cooperation agreement, if they purchase certain equipment from certain countries. So even if the Philippines will lose millions of pesos here, the Marcos Jr. administration canceled this deal, which was forged during the time of Rodrigo Duterte. And finally, Marcos thought that it would be good for the Philippines to be, particularly its image, to be rebranded worldwide. And this is why, even if he has not been president for 6 months, Marcos has already traveled and has gone out of the country for trips, official or otherwise, 6 times in the past 6 months. So that's a trip per month. Compare that to Rodrigo Duterte, who was president for 6 years, but has never officially visited a Western country. Historically, he might be the only Philippine president to have this distinction. Now, what does this mean for the Philippine relationship with the United States? We all know that it was very precarious under the term of Rodrigo Duterte. Rodrigo Duterte uh, not only uh, not only ignored, if not did not really implement the enhanced defense cooperation agreement signed and was forged during his predecessor, which is President Aquino. Rodrigo Duterte at one point also threatened to abrogate the U.S. Visiting Forces Agreement, uh, and has questioned the Philippines' alliance with treaty alliance with the United States. Under Marcos, there was no such desire. There was no such motivation to continue this line of positioning. And with less than a year in office, he has already been visited by key officials of the United States, of the Biden administration, that includes Secretary of State Blinken, as well as 2 weeks ago, the visit of Vice President Kamala Harris in the Philippines, to the point that Harris even visited Palawan Island, which is the nearest island to the contested South China Sea between the Philippines and China. Marcos has also expressed the openness to resume FONOPS operations in the West Philippine Sea, which was also stopped during the time of Duterte. In terms of the implementation of EDCA, or the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, Marcos and the United States has already agreed to use, according to reports, 5 of the 11 originally designated military sites wherein U.S. forces and equipment could temporarily base. Bear in mind that the Philippine 1987 Constitution bans foreign bases, but EDCA was able to not violate the constitutional provision by allowing Philippine military facilities to be used for temporary basing of U.S. troops. I will not be surprised if some of these sites will be located in the northern part of the country, and perhaps even previous U.S. bases like Subic, the Subic Naval Base, might be used strategically. These sites in the northern Philippines would play a critical role in U.S. geostrategy, particularly if things in the Taiwan Strait will become unstable. Hopefully not. And apart from that, Marcos was able to get a lot of concessions with the Biden administration, such as further cooperation in non-traditional security issues that includes climate change, uh, other human security issues, and even economic security ventures that somehow seems to be the payoffs of having a cordial and very open stance with the United States. Does this mean that Marcos will somehow not express a similar cordial disposition with the other superpower, which is China? Uh, Philippine foreign policy will not likely be the reverse of what happened under Duterte, because Marcos and his family has a very close relationship with China even before he became president. Marcos immediately declared when he met Xi Jinping in the sidelines of the ASEAN summit that the West, this last month, that the West Philippine Sea is not to define the bilateral relationship between the Philippines and China. Marcos also said that the Philippines will continue to adhere to the One China policy, but honestly, if you ask me, I could give you multiple interpretations of what the One China policy means to the Philippines, because it seems like throughout history, different presidents have differently defined what the One China policy is. Marcos, even though his the province of his roots, which is Ilocos province, only has 100,000 in population, China has agreed to set up a consulate in his own uh, fief. We call it, because political dynasties in the Philippines oftentimes are also landed elites. Uh, his sister, right? So you must think that Philippine politics is always a family affair. Marcos Jr.'s sister is a sitting senator of the Republic, and she currently chairs the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. So, as I will later reveal, that Philippine foreign policy under the Marcos administration may turn out to be not just a personal affair of Marcos Jr. as president, but a family affair of the Marcos dynasty. Senator Aimee Marcos, uh, his sister, has even opened the idea of collaborative activities in the West Philippine Sea that includes joint patrols with the Chinese Coast Guard or the Navy, which seems to be quite startling for the Philippine security sector, particularly the Navy. However, the Marcos Jr. government also said that they have found a loophole in the law in which renewable energy ventures will no longer need a majority domestic stake. And this opens the opportunity for Chinese firms and companies and Philippine firms to cooperate on energy, particularly renewable energy of possible sources in the West Philippine Sea. And Marcos Jr. will officially visit as President China by January next year. So he will visit China first before he visits the United States. Although there are still certain issues the about allowing members of the Marcos dynasty from traveling to the United States. Marcos in the last APEC summit was quoted to saying that the best politics is to perform. And in his mind, of course, and from our interpretation, to perform means to perform substantively. But in the study of politics and in the social sciences, performing might also mean performativity. So a performing president and a performative president are means differently, because performativity emphasizes more on optics and displays of action rather than actual and concrete policy outcomes. So I just had to put this here because when Marco said the best politics is to perform, to my mind, it seemed like he's in a mode of performativity rather than actual performance. And therefore, if this is the case, if this is the lens that we're going to use, what is key is to always take note the key audiences of Marcos's foreign policy performances. Now, as I mentioned earlier, can the Philippines hedge under Marcos? Officially, what the Marcos Jr. administration said that it will have a policy of non-alignment. As I've said, this seems to be quite difficult given the Mutual Defense Treaty of the Philippines with the United States, so much so that when pressed for what will likely be the Philippine position in a crisis in the Taiwan Strait, uh, his cousin, distant cousin, who is the ambassador to the United States, said that the Philippines' position will depend on what will be its strategic interests if conflict in the Taiwan Strait will happen. So this strategic ambiguity seems to operationalize or concretize a policy of hedging or non-alignment. But there are some members of his government who seem to argue that what they are proposing is non-alignment by neutrality, which the Philippines has never taken a position of neutrality in its foreign policy history, nor can the Philippines afford this because when we say neutrality, you just don't take any position on anything, right? Which is different from non-alignment. But as I've said earlier, hedging under by the Philippines might prove difficult, particularly if regional flashpoints like the Taiwan Strait would result in more intensified conflict, and the Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty as well might conflict with its compliance with the One China policy, and therefore the Philippines might not be able to successfully hedge, unlike some of its Southeast Asian neighbors. This is still an ongoing study with several academic colleagues. We surveyed around 1,200 members of the foreign and policy security community in the Philippines. So these are members of the military, police, other security sector institutions, as well as civilian bureaucrats, academics, researchers. And we asked them on what are the most pressing national security issues. We asked them to identify three. So almost half of the respondents identified the West Philippine Sea encroachments as a pressing national security issue. US-China strategic competition is one of the least regarded as a pressing national issue, but together with the West Philippine Sea encroachments, there is a high regard towards human security threats as a pressing national security issue. I think this is where Japan and other middle powers could come in, the role of middle powers in somehow helping small states like the Philippines traverse US-China competition. Under Marcos, who he met the Japanese Prime Minister in a side meeting during the UN General Assembly, that there is going to be a continuation of the engagement, particularly enhancing the strategic partnership between the Philippines and Japan. The first subway rail project in the Philippines are under Japanese cooperation agreements, as well as the continuation of the Coast Guard modernization. And finally, this is the newest development, is that there seems to be a desire on both countries to explore a visiting forces agreement, which would be huge, in my opinion. And the Philippines seem to be a testing ground for a lot of Japan's regional security initiatives in the Indo-Pacific. And why is this acceptable to Philippine security and foreign policy elites? Because when we ask them who should the Philippines forge security partnerships with or strengthen existing partnerships, Japan almost was first. It is a distant second with the United States, while China seemed to be fourth. Although when we ask the same question in 2020, China was dead last, while Japan was first, and I think the United States was second. And then when we ask them about their outlook on US-China competition, there seems to be a hedging position being espoused by a lot of strategic policy elites in the Philippines, that the Philippines should remain neutral and should pursue close security ties with middle powers. And though there are more respondents who believe that it should side with the United States more than that it should side with China. So finally, this is my last slide. we must remember that Marcos Jr. and the Marcos family, this is their second chance at political power in the Philippines. They were uh, embarrassed the last time they were in power because they were deposed through a people power revolution. And therefore, Marcos Jr. seeks to somehow rebrand the narrative with the Marcoses, redeem, supposedly, without accountability, their image both domestically as well as internationally. So, in other words, the future of the Philippines will really depend to what extent Marcos Jr. as president will be able to pursue the national interest of the Philippines that is not distinct with their interests as a political dynasty. The more that they are apart from one another, meaning Marcos's personal and family interests diverge from Philippine national interests, the more that Philippine foreign policy will not be based on national interest. So I'll end there and I look forward to the discussion.